You unlock this universe with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of remarkable brands, a dimension of conviction, a dimension of revolution. You are moving into a journey of breakthrough ideas, actions, and progress, of remarkable, positive, and enduring impact. Welcome. You've just crossed over into the Dent Zone.
All right, welcome to the Dent Zone. I'm Robin Young. I'm here with my co-founder, Chad Dick. We are from Denter. Denter helps you and your team to activate profound impact on your company, category, or the world at large.
Why do we call it the Dent Zone, Robin?
Why do we call it the Dent Zone? Yeah. So it's the Dent Zone because at Denter, we're all about impact. We consider the most profound result that you can have as a company is impact. Profound impact, lasting impact, positive impact. So we called it the Dent Zone as a way to demystify what it takes to create a positive, profound, lasting impact with your brand, your business, your company.
Yeah, and I would say it addresses a big problem we see in the world, particularly in the world of brand and marketing and agencies who serve those folks, which is a lot of talk without a lot of walk. So two of the central ideas behind starting this company with a mission is to encourage people to move from words into actions and choose those actions that will have the most positive, meaningful, and lasting impact.
So the point of today's episode is to talk about what have been some of the most impactful brands that we've seen in our time. So we're not going all the way back 100 years. We're trying to look at just in the past 25 years. Lots happened. Lots changed. There's been some good change and there's been some not so great change. There's been brands that have had maybe good intention, but those actions haven't actually backed up that intention. We wanted to put together an episode that just celebrated a lot of the most impactful brands in many different categories. And one thing I should say about Denter, our company, is that we're what I like to call industry agnostic. So we're long-tailed in the amount of industries that we've worked in, both Chad and I, but our lens has always been on focusing on brands that are making a profound impact.
Where did we come up with the name Denter? A lot of times people will ask us, and it's inspired by a very simple quote from Steve Jobs. He said very famously, "We're here to make a dent in the universe. Otherwise, why else be here?" And I think that really sums it up at a very individual, personal level. What motivates people is they want to leave their mark. They want people to know they were there. They want to leave a lasting impression. They want to leave a lasting improvement on their world and the people that they impact. And we think that quote summarizes beautifully what the Denter mindset is all about, which is don't do it unless it's going to leave a positive, meaningful, lasting impact. And it becomes a brilliant filter by which we can decide what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. It can be a compass to point the direction in which we want to move as people and ultimately as teams and an organization. As we like to say at Denter, all remarkable brands, companies, businesses, and organizations at the beginning and the end of the day are built by people. So we are trying to encourage people to adopt a particular mindset and, more importantly, a set of behaviors that will result in leaving a positive, meaningful, lasting impact on their world, however they might define it. And we don't mean a dent like denting your car or breaking something for the sake of breaking something. We mean a little bit like when an asteroid impacts a planet and can change the whole universe and leaves an enormous crater that memorializes that profound impact. That's what the metaphor means for us. And so we're trying to encourage people to think and, more importantly, behave in ways that will leave that kind of positive, meaningful, lasting impact on the world, be it the whole universe, as the ambition of Steve Jobs at Apple was, or it could be a smaller definition of your world and universe. It might be on your team. It might be on your internal culture. It could be just in your category. But ultimately, choosing a universe that's meaningful and matters to you is the sort of the landscape in which we'll be talking.
You know, what is interesting to me too is as I was doing a little bit of research into today's episode, I was thinking about, God, I wonder how many of these companies were actually aware of the dent or the impact that they had or that they were going to make. So many of them start in very different places. Netflix didn't start as a streaming service. It certainly didn't start as what it was today. So how much foresight do you have into the impact that you're going to have? I think at the beginning, you may not know the product or the service that you're ultimately going to offer, but I think you have a general sense of the impact, the way that you want to change things. And that intention might not always be exactly where you end. And that's kind of the point behind knowing what is the lasting impression that you want to have. Again, whether it's on your category, on society, on the world at large. You don't always know how big the impact's going to be. I doubt very much that Netflix back in the day knew how big, how profound their impact was going to be when they started. And I think also the other thing about strategy is that it's not finite. It's not something for you to do once, check it off your list, and oh, good, I'm glad we're done with that. It's constantly evolving. As the world and the environment around you evolves, you have to evolve your strategy too. You have to evolve your brand and your positioning and what you're fighting for. It shouldn't change fundamentally, but it should evolve as things around you change.
Yeah, there's a couple things in there that you said that I'd pick up on. The first is, and we see this so many times in the world of corporate America, there's a bias to action that sometimes manifests itself as ready, fire, aim. We build the plan, we start taking action without any sense of strategy, intention, or direction. So we're not talking about that at all. I do agree that action matters more than words, but we need to provide some filter and direction to that action. And I would agree with you that did Netflix have a crystal ball to know 20 years after they started mailing us DVDs in the mail that they would become the biggest Hollywood producer out there? Probably not. But they had incredible ambition and intentions. It's so easy as a knee-jerk to say, okay, what am I going to go do differently? This is more than just doing something differently. Love the famous Apple campaign, Think Different, or Just Do It from Nike. But we need to put some boundaries and direction around that before we just start firing off in a new direction if we really want to have a positive, meaningful, and lasting impact.
See, I think that these are some things that innately as marketers, as business owners, we know them. And yet when we're in the moment, we don't always do them. Like, we know it's one thing to say something and it's another to actually back it up with action. We know that. We know good thoughts, good deeds, good behaviors. Like these are all things that innately I feel like we know. But as somebody who has worked as both a copywriter and owned a creative agency before, I can tell you that it's not uncommon for a corporation to get so wrapped up in what our mission statement is, what our core values are, and where those core values live. And they get so wrapped up in the words and they don't think enough about the action. And the action is the real follow through. Like, to use a sports analogy here, you don't talk about the prep to the layup. You talk about the actual score. You talk about the actual result. Without that, what's the point of everything else? It's not to say it's not important. Words are your thoughts made verbal, but that's just one piece of the pie. And if it's not supported by action, then you're not going to have that impact. That's the part that actually creates the impact. That's why we stress so much about the action on the other side of it.
Yeah, I would summarize that and say words are necessary but insufficient. They can only take you so far. And I can't tell you how many companies I've worked with who've defined whether it's a brand identity or corporate mission statement or, you know, today, to use today's P word, this grand notion of purpose. It's like, and how many of them want to reduce it down to give it to me in a pithy 7-word sentence. And it's like, if you think we as complex human beings in the world in which we operate, everything can be reduced to a handful of words like an advertising tagline, your focus is on the wrong things. You are wordsmithing, you are letting perfection be the enemy of progress, and what you really need to do is shift your mindset and, most importantly, your behavior to that thing that matters most to you. If you can get clear on what matters most to you, then you can project it out to the outside world through all of the aspects of your brand and business operations that people see and ultimately purchase in a commercial sense. They won't buy whatever you're selling unless they buy into it today. Yes, you might have a transactional product benefit relationship, and there are plenty of impactful brands and companies out there that made fantastic products. Rob and I were talking the other day about, from my own personal story, I would say TiVo. I had a relationship with TiVo for almost 2 decades. Why? Because they had a brilliant product and user interface that made finding, searching, and watching television like the next generation simple. But then they never went beyond that. They never built a brand, and they never built a mission. They never built something that we all cared about. And the rest of the world caught up and passed them by. There's a big difference between product solution, delivering a functional benefit, and what we're talking about here. I'm sure in all of our lives, there's only going to be a handful of brands that we can point to, brands and companies and organizations, and if we know the people behind them, who make a really positive, meaningful, lasting impact on our life. And, Steve Jobs, towards the end of his life, and of course, once he passed, all of the eulogies to him were about how he literally changed our world, whether it's from cell phones to PCs to, music to iPads. They couldn't have said those things when they got set out on it. They just got set out on, hey, we're crazy creative people who are out here to change the world, and we're crazy and creative because we believe we can actually go do it. And that is the sentiment behind that Denter quote of, look, if you're not here to make a dent in the universe, why else be here? So I think the ambition, the audacity, the intention to make a positive, meaningful, lasting impact, and then you define what that actually means in your world and your universe, depending upon what business you're in and what change you want your brand to bring about in the world.
So let's get into it, shall we? There's a number of brands in here that Chad and I completely agree on. And frankly, as a consumer, even if you don't necessarily use these products, they're kind of undeniable in terms of their impact. Apple being one of them. We don't need to belabor that. Google, obvious. Again, it's changed the way that we have searched, accessed, and shared information, among other things. Netflix, we've talked about. It just completely renovating how we consume entertainment. Disney, although I don't know if Chad agrees with me on this one, Disney, for me personally, defined my childhood. I think that even today, it is still the utmost when it comes to amusement parks. It is still, nobody holds a candle to Disneyland. It's still a gold standard when it comes to animation, when it comes to movies. There's still a major player in that space, and that we're talking about a 100-year-old brand here. It's not easy to have that kind of legacy and to still keep up. So I think Disney would certainly be on my list. Venmo, we discussed. I mean, anytime you have a brand that changes the lexicon, the vocabulary, and it literally becomes part of the way that we describe a behavior, that's an easy entry point on our list. So Uber, Lyft, you don't say I'm going to hail a cab anymore. You say I'm an Uber. I'm going to take a Lyft. You don't say, oh, I'll pay you $10 for our pizza. You say, oh, I'll Venmo you.
Google it, Bing it. Yeah.
Those are significant changes, and again, even if you don't use the product, even if you don't use the app, you cannot deny the impact that they've had on consumer behavior.
Well, and having spent my career in the brand marketing world, people always used to talk about sort of the gold standard, the panacea was when your brand name became a verb, like that was the end all be all. I would just reframe that a little bit and say it became a verb because it was a brand built on action that really mattered and made an impact on our life. So I think that phrase came from brands becoming synonymous or generic for the category. Think Kleenex, right? Xerox It would be a better example back in the day, right? You need to make a photocopy, you Xeroxed something. To their credit, Xerox has transformed themselves. So they have changed the world and changed their world as the world has evolved around them. I think that's another maybe principle here that we talk about, which is change is inevitable. Change is constant. Change happens all around us. And I think to oversimplify, there are basically two types of brands and businesses out there. Those who let change happen to them and they react to it. Or Denter for us is synonymous with those who embrace change, drive change, and are proactive about it. And it's not change for change's sake. It's change for the better. This is not instantaneous disruption we're talking about here. This is not eureka invention. This is a journey and a path in a direction to try and move the universe forward in some positive, meaningful way. And you could argue that, let's use your Netflix example. They made it a hell of a lot easier to watch videos by sending them to us in the mail. We didn't have to go to Blockbuster. We didn't have to worry about late fees. And of course, collecting all the data on what people ordered, they understood people's preferences, and then they moved it to the digital world. So now we're streaming. Now that just like put their data collection on steroids and turn them into actually creating content, understanding what do we want, what do we need, and then they gave it to us. And they're just out there to try and deliver to us the most compelling content they can in the most user-friendly, easiest way. That also punctuates the point about reactive versus proactive. So I would argue that the movie theater chains were largely reactive to the world of entertainment and technology changing around them. And they're still doing it today. My local movie theater chain, their tagline used to be, moviegoing the way it used to be, only better.
Oh.
So they're in reaction mode versus Netflix has changed that world because they proactively disrupted themselves by saying, okay, this DVD by mail thing is only going to last so long. And I think we all know that last year was the last year that they mailed DVDs. And I think they even
Yeah.
let people who still had them keep them because they're so obsolete. So, but think about that for a second. Netflix have initial success and they don't rest on their laurels. They're already off working on the next round of success and the next round of success. And I would say that's a universal principle among denters, which is they are driven by ambition and intention. They make a positive, meaningful impact, and then they go do it again and again and again. And what can we do to be inspired by and learn from these people to perhaps even take some of those ideas and apply them to our own business?
Right. It's intriguing, isn't it, when you have somebody who changes the game so much that they start to impact other categories. So, like, I doubt that any movie theater were much worried about Blockbuster putting them out of business before. And now, I mean, they've changed the game. So the way that they've changed how we've consumed entertainment, it changed from decade to decade. So originally, yes, it was DVDs, and now it's with streaming, and now it's also with just coming up with their own content, their own stories. I mean, who knows what it'll be 20 years from now, God willing that they're still in business. So I think those ones were easy for us to answer. The ones that I'm more conflicted about, because they have had an impact, however, I'm not entirely sure that the impact is all the way positive. Let's talk about that for a second. So social media. Now, me in particular, there is not a day that goes by that I don't find myself on TikTok or that I'm not checking my Instagram or checking my Facebook. And it's more than just for business too. Social media has completely altered the way that we connect with other people. Now, I think at the beginning, maybe it was about having the opportunity to connect with people that you otherwise might not, family members that live in different areas or previous classmates, or even people that you wouldn't necessarily know because maybe they live somewhere not within your vicinity. Maybe you're not really connected to them other than your shared likes or shared interests. I think in its original format, social media was a good thing. I think where it's gone a little south is that now we have an addiction problem, especially young people that have become so addicted to social media. I think this is where having a little bit of corporate responsibility feels like it's lacking here. So I was very conflicted about putting social on here. On the one hand, I think Facebook was the original. One could argue that MySpace was the original, but obviously they're not around today. And I don't think that they had quite the impact that Facebook did. And I would say TikTok has changed, obviously, the social media landscape from imagery to video being much more popular, and just really changed the way that we have interacted. If you're on the TikTok platform too, there is such a world within that platform. Like there are inside jokes, there are little bits that you really only get when you're on the platform, when you're part of this community. Made stronger by pandemic too, the fact that everybody was home and we were having trouble engaging and finding that outlet. So I think the timing of that app was really profound too. So like I said, I'm conflicted about that because it still remains to be seen whether it's a positive impact or not.
Well, shocker, I'm going to agree and disagree with you. Having been an avid consumer of some of those social media in their early days, you cannot argue with the positive impact it had. I mean, think about Twitter in the Arab Spring, the ability to organize, mobilize people to overturn an oppressive government in that case, I think is inherently a good thing. And I think my take on the world of social media is brilliant first step. A lot of them fall down on the second and third step. There's two things that really bother me. One, the business model and the brand are disconnected. Those are still fundamentally business models that are built on aggregating eyeballs and selling them to advertisers. So there is a major disconnect between the viewer and the user, who is the product, and then the way that they're monetized. And until they can figure out that disconnect and reward the user for the value that they're creating for the B2B side of things, I think there will always be a little bit of that dysfunction. And I think then the failure to evolve, the failure to realize that as you got bigger, as you got stronger, we like to say tall brands cast a long, dark shadow under the bright light. There are these algorithms and machines and man-made programs that are designed to manipulate and control our behavior in the same way that the sounds of a slot machine in a casino can encourage us to gamble too much, pumping oxygen into the room to keep you awake all night long. Like, that's malicious and insidious, and people have called them out for that, and they haven't done anything about it. Because what I think that reveals is they are far more interested in monetizing you as the product and having an algorithm that is predictable and repeatable, and they literally can programmatically and predictably manipulate your behavior. Now, I can perceive that as an adult. I share your concern about kids. And the saddest thing I see today is when I go out to dinner with my family and we're sitting next to another family in a restaurant, and it's two parents and their kids are like glued to an iPhone or an iPad, whether they're doing social media or they're playing a game. It's like we have taught people to disconnect and detach from other human beings. If you remove the humanity from the equation, you're going to really struggle to be a denter in my mind. And so I wouldn't put any of the social media companies on my list for that reason, because I don't think that they have quite yet figured out how to be truly a force for good. And you think back to the early days of Google and that motto that, they were sort of famously known for, do no evil. I think that applies to the entire world of social media, technology, search, artificial intelligence. You need to fundamentally believe that and let that drive your intentions and your actions. Otherwise, we're in for some trouble.
And listen, Chad and I live in the real world. So we know that these businesses need to make money. And we're not saying that's a bad thing. But what we are saying is to be aware of the impact that you're making. And if that impact is starting to have a negative impact, then do something about it. Don't just say that you're connecting real people and look at all these great things we're doing over here. And yeah, there's some concessions to be made over here. If you're aware of the problem, if you're aware of the negative impact that you have, do something about it. Otherwise, that company purpose that you hold so dear, it's going to start to feel like BS to people. That's where the authenticity check should come in. How well are we really living up to this? Your consumers will tell you about it. Your customers will tell you whether you're really winning in their hearts and minds or not. So it would be hard for me to believe that these companies are not aware of that. The question just becomes, and we're not flies on the wall in there, so we don't really know. Are they not doing anything about it because they're not doing anything about it because they're just, they're focused on the bottom line? Or are they not doing anything about it because they're working on it and it's a complex problem and they need to find a way for their success and a positive impact to live in the same world? Because I can deal with that. I could deal with, okay, you're working on it, but maybe start making some progress. Maybe make it a bigger priority.
Yeah, I mean, there's a basic equation beginning to emerge here from some of the words that we're using. So it starts with intention. What are your intentions? And I can deconstruct that and say your intentions are influenced and informed by your attitude, your thoughts, your feelings, your beliefs, your values, but ultimately they get manifested in the commercial world, in the business world, in the brand world as a strategic statement of intent. What are we trying to accomplish here? So I would boil all that sort of invisible stuff that goes on inside of our heads as our intentions, which get translated most importantly into actions. So intention, actions, and we're talking about then the impact. When they are aligned, things go well. When they get misaligned, sometimes the impact we have is not what we intended. And a really successful denter will have their eyes and ears open to monitor that, which is integrity. Brands with integrity, their actions are absolutely aligned with their intentions, their thoughts, their feelings, their attitudes. But more importantly, those actions have the desired impact. When the impact matches the intention, we are a brand with integrity. So the strongest intentions, the strongest beliefs, the strongest values get expressed in words and in actions as a point of view. This is how we see the world. And that's an important premise and precondition for changing the world. We see the world this way. We want to make it that way. We like to say to our clients, we define a point of view very simply as something that someone necessarily has to disagree with. We need to be able to express our point of view in a way that not everybody can see and not everybody will agree on. I remember in a workshop once, clients oftentimes will say, I don't want to alienate anybody. And we got into this big debate, and the CFO, it stands out as a highlight of my career when the CFO goes, no, I think I get it. It's okay to alienate people because financially, commercially, it is better to have a 50% share of 50% of the marketplace than it is to have a 5 share of 100% of the marketplace. So those brands that don't want to alienate anybody and be kumbaya and meet everybody in the middle, they're going to end up with a small market share and a very difficult business to protect versus you take a brand like Red Bull, I could argue has had a very large, I don't know whether it's positive, but definitely impact on the world of refreshing beverages. They're a multi-billion-dollar global brand that at their outset scared a lot of people. It's got ingredients I don't recognize, it's got twice the caffeine of a normal soft drink. You're charging me twice as much for half as much liquid. It's sold in bars mixed with alcohol. This thing like reeks of trouble. And yet it struck a nerve with the sort of nightclub partying crowd and then grew out from there. And their whole brand for 20 years has been built on this idea of it's going to be an uplifting experience that gives you wings. And that's all they care about. What they all stand for is an experience people remember. And it's not for everyone, but the beverage becomes the souvenir for that remarkably consistent experience across all different categories. And yet they weren't afraid to piss people off along the way. And so no one has ever toppled them from the top of that mountain of their category. So I would argue they made a profound, lasting impact, positive for the people they serve, maybe not for those who don't, but they don't care because they know clearly who that brand is for.
Agree. I would put Red Bull in that category where the product itself may not have impacted so much, but the brand was very impactful, both to their category and to consumers.
Well, and they describe themselves today as a media and entertainment and experience company that just happens to sell a beverage.
Right. Like Domino's. Domino's considers itself a delivery
technology
brand,
delivery
not a
company
pizza.
that just happens to sell
Right.
pizza. Exactly. Well, so let's extract that as a principled lesson. Can you articulate for your brand your universe in a way that's not defined by your product or your category? And then can you take it even a step further? And I'll give credit to Joseph Pine's book, The Experience Economy. Can you then think of your product and service as either the price of entry or the souvenir from a more compelling experience? It's easy to see that in the world of music. Taylor Swift writes songs, puts out music. People pay for that as the product. But what they're really going after is that ground shaking. And you want to talk about having an impact on the world. I was reading an article the other day that in one of her concerts, people were stomping their feet so much that it was actually registered on seismic sensors. They were literally shaking the world. That's what people go for. That's what people are buying into is the philosophy, the mindset, the beliefs that are behind her music, not the actual songs themselves. Because as we all know, there's a million, song contests on TV these days. Anybody can be a good singer and put a good song out there. That's not what's unique. What's unique is people connecting with her on the visceral human level of we have shared beliefs and convictions that drive our respective actions. And that's what we have in common.
So in that same category, I would put Dove. Like at the end of the day, Dove's selling soap. It's, I don't know if there's anything really profound about their products. They're good, but nothing really life-changing. However, Dove was the pioneer of the body positivity movement. I can tell you as a woman, this has fundamentally changed things for the better in recent years. We still have a ways to go. We still have a long ways to go. But Dove was the pioneer. And I would argue that Savage x Fenty, Rihanna's brand, then made it more popularized. She took it and made it more cool to be body positive as a brand. So those two, whereas like the product themselves are not necessarily innovative, those two brands fundamentally change the way that we behave or the way that we think as consumers. So they would certainly be on my list.
Well, and there's a fantastic story behind the scenes that I know of because I've done some work with the Unilever organization in the past. And some may remember years ago, they ran a Super Bowl ad and it was slated to go during halftime and it was slated to target women. And it turned out to be one of the most memorable and talked about ads of that year's Super Bowl. But before they ever even got on the Super Bowl and spent millions of dollars on this ad, they had to convince their internal management to go do it. And it went all the way up to the board because it was so controversial that they wanted to spend that much money going after a target that arguably was not the target of the Super Bowl, because the Super Bowl is predominantly men watching a football game. People just literally couldn't understand why in the world do you want to waste our money, targeting women during halftime when nobody's watching the game. That was kind of the premise of the argument inside of not doing this. And the original answer was no, you can't do it. We're not going to spend the money on that. So what did the brand team go do? And this story just fascinates me. They went and got access to the children, the daughters, the women in the lives of the senior managers and board of directors and got them just virally on video sharing their stories of how the beauty industry had ruined their self-esteem. They showed the monster of their story, which is this thing called the beauty myth that, we all need to make ourselves up and look something that we aren't actually because we're not beautiful deep down in our core. And when the senior managers and the board of directors saw their own children, their own wives, their own women in their lives lamenting this awful thing, they were like, oh, we get it. So what I love about that story is they took no as a request for more information. which you know you're a denter if when somebody says, no, you can't do it, you say, yeah, I can. Let me show you how, right? So they took that no as a request for more information. They used their beliefs and intentions to go produce an action, which was just an internally produced video to sell this thing in. And, you know, as the story goes, they eventually got on the Super Bowl and were the most talked about ad that year. And they broke the convention that actually people watched ads during the halftime. And, you know,
that's why we watch the show.
Right. And you know, in subsequent years, we've seen other brands do remarkable things in that medium and in that venue. But I would say that even beyond the mission that they have, which is changing the way women think about their bodies and what's the definition of beauty, I would even argue that in the world of brands and marketing, they set a brilliant example of how to make strategic decisions, how to take action in the marketplace that has incredible integrity. It's provocative. Does everybody agree with that? Maybe not. But, you know, for those who want real beauty, that's who Dove stands up for. It's
a smart positioning because the campaign for real beauty, it's lasted them, 20 years? And more recently, their video that shows the young girl who has, you know, access to social media, and it takes you through her sort of the life stages and how what she's seeing on social media is changing how she feels about herself, how she feels about the way she looks, ending with her in a center for eating disorders. Every time I see that video, I cry. Like I cry as the woman who had to go through that, and I cry for my daughter who I know will still grow up in this world. It creates a visceral reaction in me. Like it makes me more aware of what I'm doing too. I think that's the mark of a great impact that you want to have. And it's something that's long and enduring. So you know that it's something that this brand could thrive on for forever. And I don't get the sense from this brand that they're doing it to sell me something. As somebody who works in this industry, I usually have a pretty good BS detector when it comes to those things because I'm aware of them. And I think audiences are aware of them now. So if you're not genuinely interested in creating that impact, forget about it. Just forget about it. Don't do it so that you can sell more products. Do it so that you can create that impact. It's great that you're going to attach it to a business. You got to make money. We get it. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with that. But if you're not doing it for those positive, purposeful, meaningful impact, then just don't do it.
Yeah, I would take it a step further and say that when you do it well and you do it right, you're connecting with people beyond the level of emotion. Like it becomes unreasonable affinity to a brand because you share their beliefs and their values. And on the surface, it literally looks unreasonable. It looks like unreasonable loyalty and affinity to a brand. Like, oh my God, why do you use it so much? Or why do you consume it so much? And it's because you see yourself in the brand. And that translates into really commercially valuable metrics. You can charge a price premium. People won't buy you on deal. They'll buy you more frequently than the competition. They probably won't even pay attention to the price. Do you think I have any idea in the 20 years that I was paying for TiVo, how much I paid every year? Nope. I literally put it on auto. That's one of the few subscription auto renewals I don't care about.
Becomes part of your life. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like when you have that kind of relationship with your customers, it becomes part of your life. And then you can't imagine your life without it. And until something comes along, and even then a Me Too brand comes along and maybe a similar product, you have so much of a relationship with this brand. You are so dedicated to them that you're not going to just jump ship. That's the difference. That's the real difference between actual brand equity and just having a smart product. They're not the same.
Well,
they're not the same.
As you and I were doing research for who might go on our list, there are lots of people who like to put lists out there. Most innovative brands, most environmentally friendly brands. One of them that sort of plucked a string for both of us that we didn't like, the most influential brands. I'm like, I hate that expression because it makes it seem like we're under, and that's what social media does. They influence, they corrupt us in ways that we don't necessarily buy into or intend, right? It's going on behind the scenes. I think that's kind of insidious and malicious. This is way beyond that. This is people buying into what our brand stands for. And that's what we mean by impact. I wouldn't talk about influencing consumers. But what you can do is you can see when people's needs and behaviors aren't being fully met, if it already exists, or you can create new behaviors and new benefits. And a lot of the innovators and disruptors, clue into that. Who knew we could get a ride on demand from Uber and Lyft on push of a button on our phone until they created that? Who knew we could share office space until WeWork popped onto the scene? But the thing that those brands and companies are challenged with is it came out with a great widget with a great benefit. What are you going to do to get me to actually connect with you on the level of beliefs and values that makes me an unreasonable? And the truth is, I'm not sure they have. I mean, we know the troubles of WeWork. And, if I go into any city, I'm going to choose the one that's the most, available. Could be Lyft, could be Uber. Go to London, could be a black cab, right? So they're still wrestling with sort of commercial dimensions to define their business rather than what we're talking about here, which is having the audacity and the ambition to change our world for the better in some profound, lasting way.
Agree. This list, by the way, is no means definitive. It is our point of view. We have our own sort of criteria for how we decided who should be on it, who should not be on it. But I am interested to hear from our listeners who they would agree with. So we are going to make the list available. I'll put a link into the show notes, and you can vote up who you think should be included in the definitive.
Well, let's do a quick hit list of the ones we haven't hit yet.
Totally. So the top ones I mentioned, Apple, Google, Netflix, Disney. Instead of Ford, I put Tesla, Patagonia, Venmo, Dove, Uber, Lyft, Yelp. OnlyFans was one that I felt like was a little controversial, but it has changed things. So Headspace, Calm in the world of mental health, I think they have made terrific bounds. FedEx, UPS, Spotify, DoorDash, Grubhub, and also Bumble, Tinder. How we connect with people on a more romantic level, I think, has been changed by Bumble and Tinder and all of these dating apps, but those two mainly.
I'll disagree with you on those two because I put them in the same camp as social media. I think they've ruined the world of dating. But so after this discussion of sort of taking a look at some brands and businesses and companies that have had a profound impact on us, what can we take away from this? If you're sitting there struggling to have a breakthrough impact in your marketplace, what are some of the things you can do to get started? As we started the conversation off with, I think getting very, very clear and aligned for yourself individually and ultimately with your team and then your organization, you need to have a shared set of values, beliefs, and convictions that will drive your actions. If you're not on the same page, you're going to have chaos and anarchy internally. One of the problems that people have is they aren't aligned. Particularly the bigger the organization gets, the less alignment there is. So I think taking a step back and making time and space to make sure people are, quote unquote, on the same page is the first thing you have to do before you start taking any action to try and emulate these remarkable brands. I think the second thing is putting a premium on integrity. Let's make sure our actions are consistent with our words. Let's make sure that the impact we're having in the marketplace is consistent with our intentions. You can look at anything you do in the marketplace and run it through that lens. And if you're not having the desired impact, if you're finding there's a disconnect there, then there's some strategic upstream work that needs to be done. But, downstream, you can't be all things to all people. So that idea of sort of sacrificing and having a point of view and knowing that you're going to only appeal to a certain subset of people who share your beliefs and values, that's okay. Sacrifice means focus. Sacrifice is the essence of strategy. So if you need help sacrificing because you don't know where to focus, we can help with that. That's the thing that we have learned from this collective group of denters is getting clear and aligned on our shared vision. How do we translate that into actions? And then how do we choose the actions that will have maximum impact for what we intend in the marketplace? And that is not a linear, finite journey. That is a cyclical, sequential journey. Being able to read and respond and react to that is vital and important. So those are typically the kinds of problems that people come to us with, which is we're not on the same page. We don't know what to do. We're not getting the desired impact in the marketplace. Can you help us? I would say that, yeah, that's exactly why we built this company, was to leave a positive, meaningful, lasting impact.
So we've spoken a lot in this episode about how to take action rather than just setting the intentions and making the plans. Here are some ways that you guys can take action today. So if you're struggling with rallying your team around a common cause, what's your purposeful cause, or what's the dent or impact that you want to make? Maybe you're having trouble sacrificing and focusing around what your brand identity should be. How do you get it out of the product attributes and more into what the highest order benefit of what your brand should be about? If you're having trouble deciding what the priorities should be, maybe you're putting your innovation pipeline together and you're challenged with what should come first and what should be sacrificed. or even just moving from incremental growth to having a more profound impact. These are all problems that can be solved with this facilitative in-person workshop-based approach that we take at Denter. Get in touch and we can see how we can help you at hello@denter.co. That's DENTR.co. Thanks so much for listening to the Dent Zone.